The military cantina buzzed with noise and energy. Young Vraxian soldiers filled every table, their purple and gray skin gleaming under the harsh lights. They laughed and boasted, drinking fermented grain alcohol that burned going down. Tomorrow, they would ship out to the border zones. Tomorrow, they would face the humans for the first time. Krillax slammed his glass down on the metal table, his three eyes bright with excitement. "I heard the humans break easily," he said, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. "Their bones snap like dried twigs. No natural armor. No enhanced strength. They are weak." The other recruits at his table nodded and grinned. They had all heard the same things in their training. Humans were soft. Humans relied on machines because their bodies were fragile. Humans would fold under the might of the Vraxian Empire. "My instructor said one good hit from a Vraxian fist will put a human down for good," another recruit added. His name was Vornix, and he flexed his 4 arms proudly. "They cannot match us in close combat. They know this. That is why they hide behind their guns and ships." More laughter erupted from the table. The recruits felt invincible. They were young, strong, and trained by the greatest military in the galaxy. The humans were just another species that would learn to bow before Vraxian power. In the corner of the cantina, far from the loud groups of recruits, sat a single figure. Commander Zekthor occupied a small table meant for 2. But no one sat with him. No one ever did. His uniform was faded and worn, marked with service ribbons that spoke of 15 cycles in active combat. His scales were dull, scarred in places where weapons had found their mark. One of his 3 eyes had a permanent cloudiness to it, a souvenir from a battle he wished he could forget. He stared into his drink, not really seeing it. The voices of the young soldiers faded into background noise. He had heard it all before. He had said those same things once, back when he was young and stupid and thought war was glorious. Krillax noticed the solitary figure in the corner. He nudged Vornix and pointed. "Look, a veteran. He has the old border campaign ribbons. He has fought the humans." The group turned to look. Zekthor did not move, did not acknowledge their attention. "Let us ask him for stories," Krillax said, standing up. The alcohol made him brave and loud. "He can tell us how easy the battles were." The group of recruits moved across the cantina, pulling chairs to Zekthor's table without asking permission. They surrounded him, eager and grinning. "Commander," Krillax said, his tone showing false respect. "We would hear your tales of battle. Tell us about fighting the humans. How many did you kill? How quickly did they run?" "Ah!" Zekthor slowly lifted his gaze from his drink. His eyes focused on Krillax, then moved to each of the young faces around him. They looked so eager, so confident, so doomed. "Go away," Zekthor said quietly. The recruits laughed, thinking he was joking. Krillax sat down in the chair across from him. "Come now, Commander. We ship out tomorrow. Give us wisdom. Tell us what to expect." Zekthor took a long drink, emptying his glass. He set it down carefully, his movements deliberate. When he spoke again, his voice was low and hard. "You want to know what to expect? You want wisdom? Here it is. Everything they told you about humans in training is wrong. Every single thing." The laughter died. The recruits exchanged glances, uncertain. "Now, the humans are not weak," Zekthor continued. "They are the most dangerous enemy the Vraxian Empire has ever faced. Not because of their weapons, not because of their ships, because they do not know how to quit." Vornix shook his head. "But Commander, our training showed us their physiology. They have no armor, no claws, no natural weapons. Their bodies are fragile compared to ours." "Yes," Zekthor agreed. "Their bodies are fragile. I have seen humans injured in ways that would kill them. Wounds that should end them, and yet they keep fighting." He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "I have seen a human with a hole through his chest, continue to fire his weapon. I have seen a human with broken legs drag himself across a battlefield to reach a fallen comrade. I have seen humans fight for days without sleep, without food, without any logical reason to continue. And they won. The recruits were silent now, the alcohol buzz fading. You think this war will be easy, Zekthor said. You think you will rack up kills and earn glory. Maybe you will survive long enough to realize the truth. He paused, his clouded eye seeming to look past them, into memories he carried like stones. The truth is that humans fight like they have already died and have nothing left to lose. They fight like every battle is their last. And that makes them more terrifying than anything you can imagine. Krillax tried to regain his earlier confidence. Stories meant to scare recruits, nothing more. The war is almost won. The treaty talks are happening. The humans are beaten. Seeming. Anan Redicouter. One seeming two. And likes mented. And Anan 2C. The treaty is happening because we learned we could not beat them, Zekthor said flatly. Not in any way that mattered. We could win battles. We could take territory. But we could not break them. And in the end, that is all that matters in war. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The recruits looked up at him. And for the first time, they saw the weight he carried. This was not a soldier who had enjoyed easy victories. This was someone who had seen things that changed him. You want stories? Zekthor asked. You want to know what you are really facing out there? Fine. I will tell you. Not because it will help you, but because maybe, just maybe, it will keep one of you alive long enough to learn respect. He sat back down, and the recruits leaned in despite themselves. The cantina noise continued around them. But at this table, there was only heavy silence, waiting to be filled. Zekthor signaled for another drink. When it arrived, he took a long sip, gathering his thoughts. The memories were always there, just below the surface. Waiting. He rarely spoke of them, but these young fools deserved to know what they were walking into. I will tell you about 5 encounters, he began. 5 times I faced humans and learned that everything I thought I knew about warfare was wrong. 5 times I saw things that still haunt me when I close my eyes. The recruits waited. Their earlier confidence completely gone. They had come for boasts and glory stories. Instead, they were about to hear something very different. Zekthor's scarred hands gripped his glass. The first time, I learned that humans do not surrender. Even when they should. Even when any rational being would. Even when death is certain. He took another drink. Then began his first tale. The recruits listened. And with every word, they understood a little more about the enemy they would face. And they understood why Commander Zekthor sat alone in the corner, drinking and remembering wars he could never truly leave behind. Zekthor stared at the amber liquid in his glass, watching it catch the light. The young recruits around him were silent now, waiting. He could feel their eyes on him, hungry for the story he had promised. They wanted to know about humans. They thought they were ready to hear it. They were not ready. But he would tell them anyway. Epsilon Station. Zekthor began, his voice steady and distant. A worthless rock of ice and snow at the edge of human territory. Strategic value. Minimal. Resource value. None. Resource value. Epsilon Station. The only reason we wanted it was because the humans had it, and we wanted to show them that nowhere was safe. He took a drink, letting the burn of the alcohol ground him in the present, away from the memories. I was younger then, a squad leader, not a commander. I believed what they told me in training. I thought the siege would last a week, maybe 2. The humans were outnumbered 10-1, cut off from all supply lines, no reinforcements coming. Temperatures on that planet dropped to -70 degrees standard. Most species would freeze solid in less than 10 minutes of exposure. Krillax shifted in his seat. They held for 97 days, Zekthor said flatly. The recruits exchanged glances. Vornix frowned. How? With no supplies, no reinforcements. They should have run out of everything in weeks. They did run out of everything, Zekthor confirmed. Food, medicine, heating fuel. They ran out of almost all their ammunition by day 40. But they did not run out of the will to fight. And that, I learned, was the only resource that truly mattered. He set his glass down and leaned back, his eyes growing distant again. I was part of a patrol on day 83. We were doing sweeps through the frozen wasteland around the station, looking for any humans who might have tried to escape and hide. The cold was brutal even with our environmental suits. I remember thinking that any human caught out there would be dead within the hour. Zekthor's voice grew quieter. We found evidence of a skirmish from 2 weeks prior. Blast marks, blood frozen in the snow, debris from human equipment. 3 of our scouts had gone missing in that area. We thought animals had gotten them. Or maybe the cold. Then, we found the traps. He paused, making sure the recruits understood. Someone had set up traps. Improvised explosives made from scavenged equipment. Tripwires made from cable. Pit traps covered with ice and snow. Whoever had done this had spent time, effort, and precious resources not on survival, but on killing. We tracked the trail back to a small cave formation. We went in carefully. Weapons ready. And that is where we found him. Zekthor's scarred hands clenched slightly. His name was Jake Harrison. Human male, mid-30s by their standard. He was sitting against the cave wall, with a rifle pointed at the entrance. His left leg was broken, the bone shattered. He had been alone in that frozen hell for 2 weeks, with no food, a broken leg, and minimal equipment. He should have been dead, Vornix said. Yes, he should have been. But when we entered that cave, he fired. Wounded 2 of my soldiers before we could take him down with stun weapons. Even then, he tried to crawl toward a sidearm he had dropped. Zekthor picked up his glass again but did not drink, just held it. We secured him and searched the cave. What we found disturbed me more than the fight. He had written on the walls, not messages to family, not goodbyes, not prayers. Tactical information. Patrol patterns he had observed. Weak points in our perimeter. Times when guard changes happened. Optimal ambush. Locations. The commander's voice grew harder. He had turned his survival into an intelligence-gathering operation. He was not just trying to live. He was trying to make his survival count for something. And those traps we found? He had set them knowing he could not run, could not escape. He set them simply to kill as many of us as possible before he died. Krillax shook his head. That is insane. Why not try to signal for rescue? Why not try to survive and return to his people? Because he knew rescue was not coming, Zekthor said. He knew the station was besieged. Knew his people were fighting for their lives. So, he made a different choice. He decided that if he was going to die out there, he would die making us pay for every meter of frozen ground. The recruits were silent, processing this. Zekthor continued. We took him back to our base for questioning. The medics said his leg had been broken for at least 10 days. The pain must have been incredible. He had frostbite on 3 fingers. He was dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from exposure. And yet, when the interrogators asked him questions, he just stared at them. Not with fear. Not with defeat. With calculation. Like he was still gathering intelligence. Still looking for advantages. What happened to him? Vornix asked. He was traded back to the humans in a prisoner exchange 3 weeks later. I saw him being loaded onto the transport. He could barely walk, even with the medical treatment we had given him. But he looked at us, at the Vraxian soldiers watching him leave, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile. A knowing smile. Like he had learned something valuable and could not wait to use it. Zekthor finally took another drink. But Jake Harrison was just one human. The real lesson came from what happened at the station itself. The commander there was a human female named Lisa Monroe, captain rank. We had her station surrounded, bombarded it daily, destroyed their defenses one by one. We sent terms of surrender every week. Reasonable terms. Her people would be treated as prisoners of war, given medical care, returned home when the war ended. She never responded? Asked one of the quieter recruits. Oh, she responded, Zekthor said with a grim expression. Every time. The same message. Every time. Negative. Just that one word. No explanations, no negotiations. Just negative. He leaned forward. On day 90, we breached the outer wall. We thought it was over. We poured troops in, expecting to find a broken, starving garrison ready to surrender. Instead, we found an organized defense that hit us like a hammer. They used the breach we made as a kill zone. They had prepared for it, turned it into a trap. We lost 50 soldiers in the first 10 minutes. The recruits looked shocked. Zekthor nodded. They had saved their last ammunition for that moment. They had saved their last strength for that fight, and while we were focused on the breach, Captain Monroe led a strike team out through a tunnel they had secretly dug. They hit our supply depot, destroyed 2 of our atmospheric cruisers on the ground, and killed a battalion commander before fighting their way to an evacuation point. They escaped? Krillax asked, surprised. 38 humans out of the original 200 made it out. Zekthor confirmed. We captured the rest. Finally took the station. Command called it a victory. I was there when they brought Captain Monroe in for questioning. She had burns on her arms, a concussion, and 2 cracked ribs. The interrogator asked her why she had not surrendered earlier, why she had let her people suffer for 97 days when the outcome was inevitable. Zekthor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She looked at that interrogator with eyes that held no regret, no sorrow. And she said, because surrender was not an option we considered. Every day we held was one more day our people had to prepare elsewhere. Every soldier you committed to our station was one less soldier attacking another human world. We bought time with our blood, and we would do it again. The cantina around them seemed loud suddenly, the contrast sharp. Zekthor let the silence at their table stretch. Finally, Vornix spoke. But you captured the station. You won. Did we? Zekthor asked. We took a worthless ice ball. It cost us hundreds of soldiers, multiple ships, and 3 months. 3 months we could have used elsewhere, and the humans knew that. They knew they could not win, but they also knew they could make us bleed, and they decided the cost was worth it. He stood up slowly, his joints aching with old wounds. That was the first lesson the humans taught me. They do not fight to win in the way we understand it. They fight to make losing so expensive that victory becomes meaningless. They fight like every meter of ground costs blood, because to them, it does. Their blood, freely given. Zekthor looked at each of the young recruits. Tomorrow, you go to the border zones. You will face humans. Remember Jake Harrison, alone in the cold with a broken leg, setting traps instead of dying quietly. Remember Lisa Monroe, holding a worthless station for 97 days because giving up was not in her vocabulary. And understand that they are not exceptions. They are examples of what every human will do when pushed. He picked up his empty glass and walked toward the bar for another drink, leaving the recruits to sit with the weight of his words. Behind him, he heard them beginning to talk in low, uncertain voices. Good. Let them be uncertain. Let them be afraid. Fear might keep them alive when confidence would get them killed. The lesson of Epsilon Station was carved into his memory like scars on flesh. Humans did not quit, and that made them the most dangerous enemy he had ever faced. Zekthor returned from the bar with a fresh drink, the ice clinking against the glass as he walked. The recruits were still at his table, talking among themselves in hushed voices. They looked up when he approached, and he saw something different in their eyes now. The earlier confidence had cracked. Good. He sat down heavily, and the young soldiers fell silent again, waiting. Zekthor had opened a door they could not close. They needed to hear more now. Needed to understand what they were really facing. The second lesson. Zekthor began. Without preamble, came during the siege of New Harmony. It was a civilian colony world that had been turned into a military staging ground. We had intelligence that humans were using it to coordinate attacks on our supply lines. Command decided to make an example of it. He took a sip of his drink, the cold liquid doing nothing to cool the heat of memory. The campaign was brutal. Urban warfare, house-to-house fighting. The humans had set up a field hospital in what used to be a school building. Red Cross markings everywhere, according to their war conventions. We were supposed to avoid it, but intelligence said they were hiding military assets inside. Krillax leaned forward. Were they? No. Zekthor said simply. Just wounded soldiers and medical staff. But we did not know that until after. We surrounded the building, cut it off from the rest of their forces. The plan was to capture it quickly, take prisoners, gather intelligence. Should have been simple. 1. His scarred fingers tightened around his glass. The security detail outside the hospital was 15 humans. Good soldiers. Well trained. We hit them with overwhelming force. They fought hard. But numbers matter. We took them down within 20 minutes. Breached the main entrance. And that is when we met Ryan Webb. The name hung in the air for a moment. Zekthor's voice grew quieter, more intense. Ryan was a combat medic. Human male, late 20s. He was not a frontline soldier. His job was to heal, not fight. But when we came through that door, he was the only thing standing between us and 32 wounded humans who could not defend themselves. One medic against your entire force? Vornix sounded skeptical. One medic, Zekthor confirmed. He had been hit 7 times in the fighting outside. Ballistic rounds, energy burns. He had a hole through his abdomen that I could see from across the room. Instead, he was standing in the doorway with a rifle, and he opened fire. Zekthor's voice grew distant, remembering. We took cover. Standard procedure. Wait him out. He was wounded, bleeding, running on borrowed time. But Ryan did not collapse. He fired controlled bursts, making every shot count. When we tried to flank, he adjusted position. When we threw a stun grenade, he had already moved. It was like fighting someone who knew they were already dead and had decided to take as long as possible to finish dying. The recruits were completely focused now. One of them, a younger Vraxian named Trelas, asked quietly, How long did he hold? 4 hours, Zekthor said, and the number landed like a physical weight. 4 hours. We had him surrounded, outnumbered, and he was dying from his wounds. But he held that doorway. Zekthor, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of witness. I watched through our tactical feeds. Every 15 minutes, Ryan would fall back into the hospital, and we would think that was it. He was done. But he was not retreating. He was going back to treat wounded. He would drag himself to a soldier, apply bandages or inject medicine, then drag himself back to the entrance and start firing again. That is not possible, Krillax said, but his voice lacked conviction. I have seen the recordings, Zekthor replied. I have watched them many times, trying to understand. Ryan used medical supplies to make improvised explosives. He packed wounds with quick-seal foam, then went back to fighting. When he ran out of rifle ammunition, he switched to a sidearm. When that ran dry, he found a blade, a surgical tool. At one point, I watched him cauterize his own wounds with a plasma torch between firing positions. The commander's voice grew harder. We could have called in heavy weapons, blown the whole building. But command wanted prisoners, wanted the wounded for interrogation, so we waited, thinking time and blood loss would do our work for us. We were wrong. Zekthor leaned back, his eyes distant. I was part of the team that finally got inside when human reinforcements broke through our lines. We found Ryan on the floor, barely breathing, lying in a pool of his own blood. The 32 wounded humans he had been protecting were all alive. Some had been stabilized well enough to be moved. Others had been given pain medication. Their conditions managed. He had been fighting us and treating patients at the same time. Why? Asked Trelez. Why fight so hard for soldiers who were already out of the war? They were wounded, no threat. Why not negotiate, try to save himself? Because that is not how humans think, Zekthor said. We found medical protocols he had written on the wall. Treatment priorities, medication dosages, patient status updates. In case he died, he wanted whoever found the wounded next to know how to care for them. He had prepared for his own death, but not for the possibility of abandoning those patients. He took another drink, needing it. The humans have a saying, leave no one behind. I had heard it before but never understood it. Ryan made me understand. Those wounded soldiers were not assets to him. They were not tactical considerations. They were people he had sworn to protect, and that oath mattered more to him than his own life. The young recruits were silent, processing. Zekthor could see them trying to fit this information into their understanding of warfare. It did not fit. That was the point. We pulled Ryan out when the human reinforcements secured the building. Their medics worked on him immediately. I watched them loading him onto a transport. He was barely conscious, had lost tremendous amounts of blood. But as they carried him past me, his eyes focused. He looked right at me, and I saw something there that I still see in my sleep. What did you see? Fornix asked. Pride, Zekthor said quietly. Not anger, not pain, not fear. Pride. He had done what he set out to do. He had protected those wounded soldiers, and knowing that, he could accept whatever came next. That look told me everything I needed to know about how humans see their duty. He leaned forward, making sure each recruit met his gaze. Ryan survived his wounds. I learned this later, through intelligence reports. He recovered, was awarded their highest military honor, something called the Medal of Honor. The citation said he held off enemy forces for 4 hours, while mortally wounded, saving 32 lives. But the citation missed the real point. What point? Krillax asked. Ryan was not trying to be a hero. He was not thinking about medals or honors. He was thinking about 32 people who needed him. And nothing else mattered. Not his wounds, not the odds, not his own survival. Just those 32 people. Zekthor's voice grew intense. That is what makes humans dangerous. They fight for each other, not for territory, not for resources, not for glory. For the person next to them. For the ones who cannot fight anymore. For the ones who need protecting. And he stood up again, pacing now, the old injuries making his movement stiff. We fight for the Empire. We fight for honor and duty and conquest. These are abstract things, but humans fight for names and faces and memories. They fight for the soldier who shared rations with them yesterday. They fight for the medic who patched their wounds. They fight for the friend who is not coming home. Zekthor turned back to the recruits. Every human you kill becomes fuel for the ones still fighting. Every wounded human who makes it home because someone like Ryan bled for them becomes a reason to keep fighting. They carry their dead with them, not in body, but in purpose. And that means they never truly fight alone. The cantina noise continued around them. But at their table, the silence was heavy with understanding. These young soldiers had come looking for stories of easy victories. Instead, they were learning about an enemy that redefined what warfare meant. I think about Ryan sometimes, Zekthor said, sitting back down. About what drives a being to do what he did. We are taught that survival is the highest priority, that preservation of self is logical and right. But humans add another layer. They believe some things are worth dying for, and they do not just believe it in theory. They live it. They die for it. He finished his drink in one long swallow. When you face humans in battle, remember this. You might wound them. You might have them outnumbered. You might have every tactical advantage. But if there is someone behind them that they are protecting, someone they have decided matters more than their own life, then you are not fighting one soldier. You are fighting something that cannot be defeated by conventional means. You are fighting someone who has already accepted death and is just deciding how much it will cost you before they fall. The recruits looked at each other, the weight of Zekthor's words settling on them like armor. They had wanted to hear about weakness, about easy enemies. Instead, they were learning about the most dangerous opponent in the galaxy. Someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Zekthor stood once more. "I need another drink," he said. "And you need to think about what I have told you. Really think about it. Because tomorrow, that thinking might be the only thing that keeps you breathing." He walked away, leaving them with images of Ryan Webb, the medic who would not die, who bled for 4 hours to protect people who could not protect themselves. It was a lesson carved in blood and pain, and Zekthor hoped these young soldiers would remember it when it mattered most. When Zekthor returned, this time, he found the recruits had not moved. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The cantina around them was beginning to empty as the night grew late. Tomorrow would come early, and most soldiers were heading to their bunks. But not these young Vraxians. They were waiting for more. Zekthor sat down and signaled for another round for the table. The recruits accepted the drinks, but barely touched them. They just watched him, waiting for the next story, the next lesson. He could see the change in them already. The swagger was gone. The easy confidence had evaporated. Now, they wanted knowledge, wanted any advantage that might keep them alive. The third lesson, Zekthor began, happened in the void. Space combat, where we had always held the advantage. Our ships were faster, our pilots better trained, our tactics proven across 100 campaigns. We thought the stars belonged to us. He paused, remembering the vast darkness between worlds. The Battle of Arcturus was meant to be a decisive victory. We had 3 battle groups against 1 human fleet. The numbers favored us heavily. Our strategy was simple. Overwhelm them with superior forces. Break their lines. Scatter them. It should have worked. Krillax listened intently. What happened? We ambushed a human fighter squadron as they were returning to their carrier. 12 human fighters against 30 of ours. They did not stand a chance. Within 5 minutes, we had destroyed 11 of them. 11 of them. Only 1 remained. Zekthor's voice dropped. His call sign was Ghost. His real name was Danny Torres. Lieutenant. Young even by human standards. And he was about to teach us that numbers do not always matter. The commander's scarred hands wrapped around his glass. Danny's fighter was heavily damaged in the initial attack. Navigation systems were failing, life support was compromised, and his main weapons were operating at half capacity. Standard procedure for any pilot in that situation is immediate ejection. You signal, surrender, eject, and wait for pickup. Every species in the galaxy follows this logic. He did not eject, Vornik said, already understanding where this was going. He did not eject, Zekthor confirmed. Instead, he did something that our tactical computers could not predict, and our pilots could not counter. He turned his dying ship into a weapon and started hunting us. The recruits leaned closer. This was not the story they expected. Zekthor continued. Danny used the debris field from his destroyed squadron as cover. He shut down all non-essential systems, making his ship almost invisible to our sensors. Then he waited, patient, calm, like he had all the time in the world, even though his oxygen was leaking and his ship was falling apart around him. Zekthor's voice grew more intense as he relived the memory. Our pilots were celebrating, breaking formation, confident the fight was over. That was when Danny struck. He came out of the debris field at maximum acceleration, targeted the nearest fighter, and destroyed it before the pilot even knew he was under attack. Then, he vanished back into the wreckage. "One kill," Trellis said. "That is impressive but not decisive." "It was not about the kill," Zekthor explained. "It was about the message. Danny was telling us that the fight was not over, that giving up was not in his vocabulary, and he kept telling us that message, over and over, for the next 18 hours. The number shocked them. 18 hours. In a damaged ship, with failing life support, against overwhelming odds. I was monitoring communications from our command ship," Zekthor said. "I heard everything. Our pilots were supposed to be hunting one crippled fighter, but Danny turned it around. He made them afraid. Every time they thought they had located him, he would appear somewhere else. He used manual piloting, flying in ways our computers said were impossible. Humans have this ability, this capacity to react and adapt faster than any programmed system." Zekthor took a drink, remembering. Danny destroyed 3 more fighters over those 18 hours. He damaged a frigate by luring it into a debris field and detonating abandoned fuel cells at precisely the right moment. He disrupted communications for an entire battle group by hacking into an abandoned relay satellite and sending false coordinates. And all the while, his oxygen was running out. "How did he survive so long?" asked one of the quieter recruits. "He reduced his oxygen consumption by forcing himself into a meditative state between engagements. He rationed every breath. He used emergency stims to keep himself conscious when carbon dioxide levels should have knocked him out. And he kept fighting." Zekthor's voice held something like admiration, though it was mixed with horror. "We intercepted his communications during this time. He was not screaming or panicking. He was humming. An old human song. Something about being free. And he was talking to himself, narrating his actions, like he was teaching a class." The commander pulled up a recording on his personal device, something he had kept all these years. The voice that came out was human, young, and impossibly calm given the circumstances. "All right. So when your navigation is shot, and you are flying manual, you need to trust your instincts. See, computers are great, but they think in straight lines. Humans think in curves. Watch this." The recording showed data feeds from Vraxian sensors, tracking an erratic pattern that should not have been possible. Danny's voice continued, almost cheerful. "Now the trick here is making them think you are going one direction while you are really setting up for another. It is all about misdirection. Like magic. Speaking of magic, I wonder if I will see my brother again. Hope so. He owes me 50 credits. Zekthor turned off the recording. That was hour 14. His oxygen was at critical levels. He had been flying a dying ship through a combat zone for more than half a day, and he was making jokes, talking about his brother, humming songs. Like death was just another part of the day. The recruits sat in stunned silence. Krill Axe finally spoke. "What happened to him?" Hour 17. His main systems finally gave out. He could no longer maneuver effectively. We closed in, thinking we finally had him. But Danny had one more trick. Zekthor's voice held dark respect. He pointed his ship directly at our frigate and accelerated to maximum speed. Our commander thought he was trying to ram us, ordered evasive maneuvers. But at the last second, Danny ejected. His empty fighter missed our ship by meters, and while we were distracted by that, a human search and rescue team that had been tracking his emergency beacon swooped in and grabbed him. Zekthor leaned back. They pulled him out of space with maybe 5 minutes of oxygen left. He was suffering from hypoxia, hypothermia, and severe dehydration. His body had been pushed past every reasonable limit, and when the rescue team asked him why he did not surrender, why he fought for 18 hours in a ship that should have been abandoned, he laughed. Actually laughed. And he said, "They killed my friends." Did not seem right to just quit. The weight of those words settled over the table. Vornix shook his head slowly. "That is insane. That is human." Zekthor corrected. Danny survived, recovered, and returned to duty. 3 months later, he became a legend among human pilots. But more than that, he became a lesson for us. We learned that day that you cannot measure a human's combat effectiveness by their equipment status or their tactical position. You have to factor in something we do not have, something that cannot be quantified. 1-3. 1-3. What is that? Trellis asked. Spite, Zekthor said simply. Humans fight out of spite. They fight because giving up would mean the enemy won. Danny was not trying to turn the tide of the battle. He was not trying to survive. He was trying to make us pay. Every hour he stayed alive, every ship he damaged, every pilot he made afraid was a price we paid for killing his squadron. And to Danny, that price was worth his life. The commander stood up, his old bones protesting. Our pilots are trained to preserve their lives and their equipment. We retreat when damaged. We surrender when necessary. We make logical choices. Humans add emotion to the equation. They add rage and grief and determination. They fight for their fallen comrades, carrying their memory into every engagement. Danny was flying that ship for 12 pilots who were not coming home. In his mind, he was not alone in that cockpit. He carried his entire squadron with him. Zekthor looked at each young face around the table. When you face human pilots, understand this. They will push their ships past safety limits. They will take risks that make no tactical sense. They will turn defeat into revenge and disadvantage into opportunity. Because they are not just flying for themselves. They are flying for every human who has fallen, every comrade who needs avenging, every battle that still needs fighting. He picked up his drink. Danny Torres, the ghost of Arcturus. One pilot in a dying ship who held off an entire fleet for 18 hours. Not because he could win, but because he refused to lose. That is the third lesson. Humans do not calculate odds the way we do. They factor in things that cannot be measured. Stubbornness, loyalty, spite, love for their fallen friends. And those intangibles make them unpredictable, dangerous, unstoppable. The cantina was nearly empty now. The late hour pressed in. But Zekthor was not done. He had 2 more lessons to share. And these young soldiers needed to hear them all. Tomorrow you ship out, he said quietly. You will face humans in battle. Some of you will meet people like Jake on the ice, like Ryan in the hospital, like Danny in the void. And if you survive those encounters, you will understand what I am telling you now. Humans are not just soldiers. They are survivors who have weaponized their refusal to quit. And that makes them the most terrifying enemy in the galaxy. The recruits nodded, their faces serious. They were learning. Whether that learning would be enough to keep them alive remained to be seen. But at least now, they knew what they were truly facing. And knowing, Zekthor thought, was the first step to survival. The cantina was nearly deserted now. Most of the other soldiers had left hours ago, heading to their bunks for the little sleep they could get before shipping out. But at Zekthor's table, the young recruits remained, held by stories that had fundamentally changed how they viewed the war and the enemy they would face. Zekthor finished his drink and set the glass down with quiet finality. His 3 eyes, one still clouded from an old wound, focused on the recruits. They looked different now. The eager young soldiers from earlier in the evening had been replaced by something more serious, more aware. Good. That awareness might save their lives. There is one more lesson, Zekthor said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to reveal. The final lesson, the one that ended the war. Krillax shifted in his seat. The war ended because we agreed to treaty terms, because both sides were tired of fighting. No, Zekthor said flatly. That is what they tell civilians. What they tell recruits in training. The truth is different. The truth is that we stopped fighting because we realized that defeating the humans was impossible. Not militarily. We could win battles, take territory, destroy their fleets, but we could not beat what they truly are. The young soldiers exchanged confused glances. Vornix leaned forward. I do not understand. If we could win militarily, then we win the war. That is how war works. That is how war is supposed to work. Zekthor agreed. But humans do not fight wars the way we understand them. Let me tell you about the final battle. The one that changed everything. He paused, gathering the memory. Even now, years later, it still sent cold fear through him. We captured a human research station near their core worlds. It was a major victory. Inside, we found databases, communication logs, strategic documents. Our intelligence officers thought they had discovered the key to ending the war. They were right, but not in the way they expected. Zekthor's voice grew quieter, more intense. Among the files, they found contingency plans. Every military has them. Plans for what to do if things go badly. We expected to find evacuation protocols, maybe surrender terms, perhaps plans for guerrilla resistance. Instead, we found something that High Command immediately classified at the highest level. A plan with the codename Scorched Galaxy. The name hung in the air like a curse. The recruits waited, barely breathing. Scorched Galaxy was humanity's response to total defeat. Zekthor continued. If they were going to lose the war, if they were facing extinction or complete subjugation, they had no plans to surrender. Instead, they were going to ensure that whoever defeated them would inherit nothing but ashes and blood. He let that sink in before continuing. Every human world, every station, every significant installation had been rigged with fail-safes. If certain conditions were met, if human command structure was destroyed, or if their core worlds fell, automated systems would activate. Their planets would self-destruct. Their stations would turn into kinetic weapons aimed at nearby targets. Their technology would be destroyed, rather than captured. Of course, Trellas looked horrified. That is madness. They would kill their own people, destroy their own worlds? They would deny us the victory, Zekthor said. Humans have a saying from their history. When facing invasion, they burn their own lands, destroy their own resources, leave nothing for the enemy to use. They have done this to each other for thousands of years. Cities burned rather than surrendered. Crops destroyed rather than let invaders feed from them. Entire regions turned into wastelands rather than allow occupation. And the pard. Crops destroyed. He pulled up his personal device again, showing text from the captured files. This was written by a human historian named Katie Sullivan. She compiled the cultural archive that explained the Scorched Galaxy protocol. Listen to what she wrote. Zekthor read from the document, his voice steady but filled with dark understanding. Throughout human history, we have proven one thing consistently. We survive. We survived ice ages that should have killed us. We survived plagues that wiped out half our population. We survived wars that turned our own planet into a charnel house. We are the descendants of every human who looked at impossible odds and said no, not to victory, but to defeat. Not to winning, but to losing. Survival is not our strategy. It is what we are. He set the device down. Katie Sullivan went on to detail specific examples from human history. Cities that burned themselves rather than surrender. Armies that fought to the last soldier rather than accept defeat. Cultures that chose extinction over subjugation. And she made it clear that this was not aberration. This was the human norm. The recruits sat in stunned silence. Zekthor continued, relentless now in his honesty. But it got worse. We found plans for biological weapons that would lie dormant for generations, activating long after the war ended. Automated defense systems that would continue fighting for decades, maybe centuries. Technological viruses designed to corrupt any systems that tried to use captured human equipment. They were not just planning to deny us victory. They were planning to make conquest a poison pill that would destroy us from within. Vornix shook his head slowly. But the cost. They would be destroying themselves. Yes, Zekthor agreed. And they accepted that cost. Because to humans, there are things worse than death. Subjugation is one of them. Surrender is another. They would rather cease to exist than live under our rule. Can you understand how terrifying that is? An enemy that would rather die than lose, that would rather take you with them into oblivion than accept defeat? He stood up, pacing now, the old injuries making him limp slightly. High Command studied these plans for weeks. They ran simulations, analyzed the data, consulted with every expert we had, and they all reached the same conclusion. We could not win this war. Not in any meaningful way. We could defeat human fleets. We could take human worlds. But every victory would be Pyrrhic. Every conquered planet would become a festering wound, bleeding us for generations. Zekthor turned back to the recruits. The humans had calculated everything. They knew that even if we won militarily, the cost of occupation would be unsustainable. Every human world would require massive garrison forces. Every city would be a potential insurgency. Every captured facility would be a potential trap. And all the while, their automated systems would be killing our soldiers, sabotaging our operations, making every day of victory more expensive than the last. So we negotiated, Krillax said quietly, understanding dawning. So we negotiated, Zekthor confirmed. Not from weakness, but from cold calculation. The treaty was not about ending hostilities. It was about avoiding mutual destruction. We agreed to peace because the alternative was winning a war, but losing our empire in the process. He sat back down, suddenly tired. The weight of years, and battles, and terrible knowledge pressed down on him. That is the final lesson. Humans are not just dangerous in battle. They are dangerous in defeat. They have weaponized their own willingness to die. They have turned their stubbornness into strategy. And they have made it clear that fighting them to the end means there is no end, just endless bleeding until both sides are gone. The cantina was silent except for the low hum of environmental systems. The recruits looked at each other, processing everything they had heard. The easy confidence they had walked in with hours ago was completely gone, replaced by something more valuable. Respect, mixed with fear. Why are you telling us this? Trellis asked. If the treaty is holding, if we are at peace, why do we need to know? Because the treaty is only paper, Zekthor said. It holds because both sides choose to honor it. But you are being sent to the border zones. You will encounter humans. You will patrol alongside them, compete with them for resources, deal with them in 100 small ways. And I need you to understand what they are. Not enemies anymore. Maybe. But not friends either. Partners who could become enemies again if things go wrong. He looked at each of them in turn. The humans you will meet are the same species that planned Scorched Galaxy. They are the descendants of Jake Harrison freezing on an ice planet, of Ryan Webb bleeding in a hospital doorway, of Danny Torres hunting our fleet in a dying ship. They shake hands and smile and negotiate. But underneath, they are survivors who have weaponized their refusal to quit. Never forget that. Never underestimate them. And never ever push them to the point where they feel they have no choice but to fight. Zekthor stood up one final time. Tomorrow, you ship out. Some of you will die. That is the nature of military service. But some of you will live will serve your time, will eventually sit where I am sitting now. And when that day comes, when young soldiers ask you about humans, tell them what I have told you. Tell them about the ice planet, about the medic, about the pilot. Tell them about Scorched Galaxy. Tell them why we made peace. He picked up his empty glass and held it for a moment. Humans have a saying, peace through strength. We learned a different version. Peace through understanding what total war with humans actually means. Not victory or defeat, but mutual destruction, with the humans taking as many of us as possible into the dark. Krillax stood up, followed by the other recruits. They looked older somehow, aged by knowledge rather than years. Thank you, Commander, Krillax said quietly. For the lessons. For the truth, Zekthor nodded. Survive tomorrow. Survive every day after. Learn from what you see. And if you ever find yourself facing a human in combat again, remember everything I told you. Remember that they do not fight to win. They fight to make losing impossible for the other side. The recruits saluted, then filed out of the cantina, heading to their bunks. They walked more slowly than they had entered, carrying the weight of new understanding. Zekthor watched them go, hoping his words would make a difference, knowing that some of them would not survive what was coming regardless. He turned to the bartender, an old Vraxian who had heard everything from across the room. Another drink, Zekthor said. The bartender poured it without comment, then spoke quietly. Do you think the peace will hold? Zekthor stared at his drink, seeing reflections of memories in the amber liquid. Jake Harrison's eyes calculating from his cave. Ryan Webb, standing in a doorway, with holes through his body. Danny Torres humming as his oxygen ran out. Katie Sullivan's words about survival being the human definition. I hope so, he finally said. Because if it breaks, if we fight them again, there will be no winner. Just two species bleeding each other until one or both cease to exist. And the humans have already proven they are willing to accept that outcome. He drank. The burn familiar and almost comforting. The cantina was empty now, except for him and the bartender. Outside, young soldiers were sleeping their last peaceful night before heading to the border. Some would meet humans and learn the lessons Zekthor had tried to teach. Others would die without understanding what they faced. Zekthor closed his eyes and saw them all. Jake, Ryan, Danny, and countless others he had encountered over 15 cycles of war. Humans who refused to quit, who turned disadvantage into opportunity, who weaponized their own willingness to die. The most dangerous enemy he had ever faced. Now, nominally, at peace. He opened his eyes and finished his drink. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not. Young soldiers would ship out. The border zones would see new patrols. And somewhere out there, humans would be doing the same, preparing for duty, remembering their own fallen, carrying forward their culture of survival. The treaty held. For now. And Zekthor prayed to gods he was not sure he believed in, that it would continue to hold. Because the alternative was unthinkable. Not defeat, not even death, but endless war against an enemy that had already decided dying was acceptable as long as they took their enemies with them. He stood up, paid his tab, and walked out into the night. Behind him, the cantina lights dimmed. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. All he could do was hope that his words had given those young soldiers a chance. A chance to survive. To understand. To never make the mistake of thinking humans were weak or easily defeated. Because humans were neither weak nor easily defeated. They were survivors. And survivors, Zekthor had learned, were the most dangerous beings in the galaxy.